Hi, Joel. Did anybody try to fix my computer? No.
Now we have a
We can
sound.
hear you.
I'm trying to
We
be a
can
part
hear
of a
you.
Zoom meeting right now and I can't hear anybody.
You can't hear us.
Thank you.
He can't hear us.
It might be in his audio settings.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
We can hear you. Good. Thank you, viewers. Hey, Fuel Milwaukee. How you doing? I see you coming on in. Come in this space. As you're entering the webinar, please go straight to the chat box and let us know you're here. Say hello to me and our panelists, which I'll introduce to you really soon here, and let us know what you're looking forward to learning and hearing in today's conversation. I'm so excited to have I have very busy panelists this week. They're hopping on, they're hopping off. I mean, everybody's got stuff to do. We're out here moving and shaking, changing the world. So I'm so honored to have this group of folks together to have this conversation. We're talking about when a city unites, a whole city, a citywide effort to fight racism. We're talking about Wauwatosa's journey towards equity and inclusion today. Go ahead right now and go into the chat. Let us know you're here. If you have questions, start asking them right away because we're going to have an action-packed 60 minutes here. I'm going to introduce the panelists. We are honored to have the mayor of Wauwatosa on the call today. He's got a lot going on. He let me know he's having other calls, so he'll be in and out of this discussion, but Dennis McBride is here. He logged on and he'll be participating in this discussion. So glad to have him here. Margaret Garney, who is one of the founding members of Tosa Together, and the person I learned all about this effort from. Hi, Margaret. So glad to have you. Yeah, shout it out. Sean Lowe, a good friend, and he's actually the chairman of the Equity and Inclusion Commission in Wauwatosa. They'll tell a little bit about the founding and creation of that commission and how Sean ended up as the chair. Hey, Sean.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're sounding good. Okay, good. And then we have another founding member of Tosa Together, Dr. Lynn Worley. I also have a history with her and love her very much. She's our resident sociologist, so we'll be tapping her for some historical and human behavior insights. Hey, Dr. Worley.
Hi, good to be here again.
Okay, so you all know that you have full control of this conversation. I want you to be full participants in the discussion. Take control of the chat. You can talk to each other in the chat room. You can also talk to the panelists. The panelists that can go into the chat will interact and respond with you. If you have a question that you just want to share with me for me to elevate to the larger group, go into the Q&A section and get comfortable with all of the controls. Go in there and play with it and make sure everything looks how you want. I personally prefer gallery style so I can see everyone's face. Okay, so let me thank our sponsors for today. Race Bridge and this entire series would not be possible without our presenting sponsor, which really helped us kick off the first several weeks of Race Bridge, Self-Help Credit Union. Those of you who are from Milwaukee and remember Legacy Bank, Self-Help is right now in that same space where Legacy Bank was. Our contact over there and our partner is Pamela Bell. She's the city executive for Self-Help, which is in several different states. And they're now expanding their footprint to Wisconsin with Milwaukee. They give loans to individuals, nonprofits, businesses. It kind of runs the gambit, and their whole mission is around creating equity and financial possibilities for all people. If you have any questions about Self-Help Credit Union, check out their website, which is listed there. And don't hesitate to reach out to Pamela Bell. She's more than happy to field any questions that you all have. Our media sponsor for the series is none other than Radio Milwaukee 88.9. I always say this is one of the most listenable radio stations. I don't care what time of day I turn it on, or even if I don't know the artist, I usually love the music, and it's a very easy station to listen to. But they're more than a radio station. When you go to their website, they tell lots of great stories about Milwaukee and everything that makes Milwaukee a special place, a distinct place in the world. If you want some inspiration and information about Milwaukee, the brands, the people, the icons that make us who we are, you want to check out their website. Thanks again to Radio Milwaukee for sponsoring us today. So I'm going to stop sharing and check in here with our panelists. So glad to have you all here. Happy to have you. I want to start by talking a little bit about Wauwatosa. So of course, I found some general stats that we can use to kind of kick off this conversation about what Wauwatosa is as a city, its place in the metro of Milwaukee. I want to get a little bit into the history of Wauwatosa. For me, I grew up on 56 in Lisbon, which is right outside of Wauwatosa. And I just remember my mother and I used to always go for walks. Whenever we went for walks, we went into Wauwatosa because it's so beautiful and just easily one of my favorite places. Picturesque, scenic, just an urban enclave of beauty, and just so close to Milwaukee. It's one of those suburbs that you can really get really close to. So I'm going to share my screen here, and let's see what I was able to find. So we came up with this beautiful picture of Tosa, and then this map that kind of gives people an idea, for those who aren't from Milwaukee originally, how close Wauwatosa and Milwaukee are. The two cities are really close together, making Tosa feel like it's a suburb and a city all its own, but it really does almost feel like, I think I grew up thinking that it was a neighborhood and the street signs were just blue. I mean, the colors were just blue. It's the same thing. This is Milwaukee. I grew up to realize that it wasn't a neighborhood, but its own city. So here, just to give some perspective and some context, we found this from Data USA. Gives information on the population of Tosa. So right under 50,000 people. Poverty rate is under 10%. Median age is right around 40. The median household income is right around 75,000. We have the employees and the median property value that you can see here. On that website, they give you the opportunity to compare and contrast cities. So I put the data in for Milwaukee proper, so you can kind of see some of the comparisons. And it gives this kind of, it starts to tell this story of these two cities that are neighbors, but in some ways have very different, the urban areas are very different, the populations are different, and the experiences are different, that I think kind of help to start to tell the story of Tosa Together and why this has been so important for you all. I'm gonna start with you, Margaret, to tell us a little bit about what your experience has been. How long have you been in Tosa? What do you love about it? And what has been your involvement with Tosa Together?
Well, I moved to Wauwatosa with my husband in 2020. We were looking for a place to start our family. And we were on St. Charles Street, which is right near the village. So I'll never forget, we went to the house and we were a little bit early, and we took a walk, and in 7 minutes we were at the river, and there's right by at Hart Park, and we thought, oh, this is great. And then we were in walking distance of the outpost and several grocery stores, and then there was the village, and we're like, okay, Wauwatosa is where we want to be. And then the house turned out to be what we needed, and we were very young in our journey. And then it just so happened to have some of the best schools in the state within walking distance as well. So my daughter just graduated from Wauwatosa East, and she had a marvelous education. She actually just did a presentation to our school board on Monday evening. So I have been really blessed to be part of Wauwatosa's community. The thing that I did wonder about was the diversity and the lack of diversity in Wauwatosa, because I grew up on the east side of Milwaukee, And our first neighbors of color moved in the year I went to college. So I was like, huh, there, but I also, in thinking about how did I want to raise my daughter, but I also am fortunate to have family in town, and my daughter's experience of being able to walk to school and really feel part of the neighborhood was something that helped me feel comfortable here. And I've made really good friends. I've been very involved in the community. Tosa Together, I think, though, has a special place in my heart because we moved in 2000, like I said, and I wanted to bring my work with developing African American leaders and leadership into my home life, but I really didn't know what to do about that. And it really worried me when the events started happening around the Ferguson, because I felt like Wauwatosa was just a sitting duck. We're like, there's nothing. I just looked around and it's like, we don't have anything. We don't have any community conversation going on. We don't have anything going on in our city government. We don't have anything going on even among the citizens that would address and get in front of having a tragedy like this. And it just, but I didn't know really what to do. And then when we had the death of Jay Anderson, my heart was just broken because I thought, what if I had worked harder earlier? What is my responsibility as a citizen? And it made me really sad. So we can talk more about Lynn's process, but Lynn actually put out a call for neighbors to come together and talk. And a lot of us had the experience of, in our work life, dealing very, in a lot of sophistication and consciousness around race and racial issues, but really not bringing that home to Wauwatosa. So for me, Tosa Together became the vehicle for that.
That's perfect. So Dr. Worley, you're a resident of Tosa, raising children in the city, and talk to us a little bit about what that experience has been and what gave you the idea for Tosa Together.
Sure. I am a transplant. I moved to the Milwaukee area in 2002. The only time I had been here before was for the job interview. So I lived in Chicago for a while as a young person, and also inner city in Detroit and in Philadelphia. So I pretty much grew up in large cities. My parents made an explicit decision to, as much as possible, buy houses or rent homes in racially diverse communities. So when I moved here, I took the job. I lived in an apartment for a couple of years in Wauwatosa, and then I met my husband. We decided that we wanted to buy a house, and we fell in love with a house that was actually right near where I worked at the time, Mount Mary. And we didn't really, and this would be, piece of our white privilege, we didn't have and maybe both being transplants, we didn't have the history. I mean, I learned a lot in my first couple of years here. As you took my class at Mount Mary, and I was already really exploring the stark racial divisions that I was seeing and the impact of hypersegregation. But we are half a block inside of Wauwatosa. And one of the first things that I worked on after I became a resident in a home in Wauwatosa was actually, I was really struck by how when I went around my neighborhood, people would often ask, are you from Wauwatosa or are you from Milwaukee? And I thought, why? Why are we asking that all the time? And so there was an opportunity to start working on what became Hartung Park. And I spent almost a decade working to help build, design, and create Hartung Park. And for me, I invested in that because I saw it as a huge opportunity to create not only great green space, but to blur the borders, because the park is part Wauwatosa and part Milwaukee is owned by Milwaukee, but there's a part of it that is owned by Wauwatosa. And I went into that project full steam because I wanted to blur boundaries and I wanted the communities to start seeing how important they were to each other. Then just to sort of fast forward, after I stopped being the president of that board, I was trying to think of, well, now what will I do with my time? And as Margaret mentioned, there were a number of big events. There was Ferguson, which I have some close friends who were involved in the peaceful protests there. And were talking to me about that. Also around that same time as just before Ferguson happened, and then just after, I brought 2 additional children into my family through adoption, and both of them are African American. And so I was already teaching and thinking and working on racial justice issues, but it started to become very personal. And my husband and I debated quite a bit. Do we stay in Wauwatosa knowing what we know, or do we move? We had a lot of friends in Sherman Park. We thought about that, and we just decided that we loved our house so much, we loved our neighbors, we'd worked so hard on the park, that we would stay put, but to try to make change. And so our energy invested then in saying, we can do better. We can do better in Wauwatosa. And that's how I got involved. In the summer that first there was the shooting of Jay Anderson in Madison Park, which is less than a mile from my home. My children, our school district is Madison School. And then we attend church in Sherman Park, the Sherman Park Uprising. And like Margaret said, I had talked to some people that I knew in Wauwatosa, and we all started reaching out to each other. We had a very, very wonderful but intense first few meetings in one of our co-founders' homes, and the organization grew. And we got involved first with some of the work to work with the Jay Anderson's family, but we knew we wanted to be much more than that. So that was sort of our beginnings. A lot of us wanted to see Wauwatosa be something that it wasn't at the time.
So when that group of people, about how many people did you start off with?
7, I think. 7
that?
or 8. Yeah, there were a couple people who couldn't come. There's
Yeah,
at
we
least
had-
one other person on the call today who was there. So
Yes, we had a core group that came together and really did a lot of organizing. But in our first event was a community conversation and a listening session so that we could hear Jay Anderson's family. And the attendance at that was like around 80 people. And we did further events that all had terrific attendance. And we started the first Black History celebrations in Wauwatosa that February. And those have been very, very well attended. So while it's a loose affiliation group, we don't actually have like titles and things like that. There's a consistent core group of about 10, and then it just gets wider. And I do want to acknowledge that Dennis has been a part of Tosa Together, and a meeting attender and then a strategist and organizer with us. I'd say at least since 2017. So
from close to the beginning. So Mayor McBride, when you took office, it wasn't like you just kind of walked into this and didn't know what Tosa Together was all about. You were an active participant in it. What was your experience, and why was it important to you to participate?
Well, first of all, I grew up in Wauwatosa. In fact, I'm sitting in City Hall right now, 2 blocks north of where I grew up. I went to school at Tosa East, and I went to UWM, and then I went to graduate school and law school on the East Coast, and came back and lived in Milwaukee for a number of years, and then moved to Boston, and then came back in 1991. When I came back, I had a 1-year-old daughter, and although my experience in growing up in Wauwatosa was wonderful, in part because I'm white, I wanted to make sure that my daughter was going to grow up in a diverse situation. When I went to Tosa East, I graduated with the first Black graduate of Tosa East in 1972.
Wow.
He's a wonderful guy, but that shouldn't have been the situation. He's still a friend of mine, but I should have had lots of friends of color, and that was Wauwatosa then. Fortunately, it's not Wauwatosa now. Wauwatosa now, as I understand, has, I think the minority population in its schools is about 36%. At the time that I came back to Wauwatosa in 1991, it was approaching 25%. And I thought, okay, I can move back to this community now. I can have my daughter educated in these schools because she will be getting the appropriate education, not just in reading and writing and arithmetic, but also in getting along with people of all kinds. And the diversity was important to me. So I also spent 24 plus years at the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission litigating employment discrimination cases. I've been involved in a number of other activities in the community where I tried to promote diversity and combat prejudice. So Tosa Together was a natural fit for that. What I didn't expect was when I filed my papers in December to become mayor was all the difficulties we're currently facing. I did expect, frankly, that Wauwatosa would have another racial crisis of some sort because we've had a series of them over the years. I didn't expect it to be as full-blown as it is. George Floyd's death had a lot to do with that. Other deaths in Wauwatosa had more to do with that. And it's been a real challenge for the entire community, and we're trying to inch our way through that right now. I represent a community that is becoming slightly more diverse ethnically and racially, but is very diverse politically. And keeping all the sides talking to one another is very, very difficult right now. And I'm trying to keep a lid on it, but it's extraordinary. And I haven't had a good night's sleep since I became mayor, starting with the pandemic I walked into, the recession we entered into, and then this racial crisis. And on top of it, we had a 13-year-old boy get hit by a train. So I'm not looking for a pat on the back or tears to be shed. I'm just saying that we are facing full-blown the sorts of things that Tosa Together, I think, started to deal with, which is how do we become a diverse community in a way that is helpful and supportive of everyone without people freaking out. You know, we still have old Wauwatosa mixed in with new Wauwatosa. And I can talk a lot about old Wauwatosa, but you don't have the hours in this webinar to do that. So anyway, Tosa Together has been a positive force because you know, we need to have these discussions. We need to move forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really encouraged by the fact that your community was so proactive. Obviously, after years of challenges and occurrences that made this necessary, but what a great way to transition into the struggle that we're in now, already somewhat organized and aligned and knowing what the challenges will be. And I imagine that it can't be easy. And, you know, old Wauwatosa is still there. Sean, I'll ask you a little bit about that. What I didn't say earlier when I talked about these walks that my mother and I would go on was that as I got older, I stopped doing that by myself because it became clear to me that in some neighborhoods I was walking through, people weren't comfortable with having me there. No one ever said anything to me, but you could just feel the looks and the glances, and I'm like, okay, maybe I should get back on the Milwaukee side, which was a bummer because, again, as a young person, I really did see Wauwatosa just as an extension of the place that I already lived, and just a really beautiful place that I was, you know, happy to be in such proximity to. But I learned very early on that there were some challenges, and it could be nothing other than my skin color, because all they had to do was look at me and decide that I shouldn't be walking up their block. Sean, you're from Tosa. How long did you live in the area, and what has your experience been as a Black man growing up in this city?
Thank you. So thank you for having me again. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here again as chair of the City of Wauwatosa Equity and Inclusion Commission. I've lived in Wauwatosa for the past 5 years. I've had a great experience living in Wauwatosa personally and professionally. I like the location of Wauwatosa. I like the fact that I can get to the expressway quickly. I can get downtown quickly and back. to Wauwatosa. It's a great neighborhood. It's a safe neighborhood. Definitely want to have a family of my own someday. So I definitely love the fact how diverse our school systems are here, and the school board in general as well. I think our school board is one of the best school boards in the whole state of Wisconsin. And they just hired a Black principal this year at one of the high schools as well, which was a first in history at that school. So I think that from that standpoint, I see Wauwatosa moving in the right direction, as well as the Equity Inclusion Commission being formed last year as well. We're coming up on a year. So these
So
talks.
Sean, while you're on that point, talk to us a little bit about the commission and its formation and your involvement.
Yeah, Margaret is on the commission with me as well, and I actually have to give all the credit to the work of Margaret and Lynn and Tosa Together. It really pushed for that commission to be formed. I just happen to be an individual who is heavily always reading the news, and literally saw a news headline about the commission being formed, and then reached out to people from there, like, well, how can I get involved in this? This is right up my alley. Fighting civil rights to racial justice for the past 15 years as a member of the National Urban League Young Professionals, in various leadership roles in the Milwaukee Urban League Young Professionals. This is right up my alley. So why not make that transition to move to be a part of something positive in my city in that manner? And elected chair by my peers, and very thankful for, again, the diversity on the commission as well. So Wauwatosa, we have a very diverse commission, a diversity of ideas and people really moving the needle forward. And we've actually gotten laws changed in Wauwatosa. How amazing is that? You know, for me to be a part of that history, to say that some of our work got laws changed and things passed in Wauwatosa. For example, the MMAC pledge, which is near and dear to the work of Fuel Milwaukee. The MMAC pledge is being one of the first suburbs ever to say and commit to diverse hiring is outstanding. And have that commitment from Mayor McBride and our Common Council was absolutely huge. And then most recently, passing on the ordinance on banning chokeholds and further expounding on that language of a chokehold ban in Wauwatosa, near and dear to my heart personally, thinking about the Eric Garner case and the George Floyd case. I would never want the city of Wauwatosa to be in that national spotlight for something that can be easily prevented.
So help us understand the relationship between, and any of you can jump in now, Tosa Together. I kind of understand the formation in a couple sentences. What's the mission and focus of Tosa Together? And then what is the relationship between Tosa Together and the commission, and what's the purpose of the commission?
So I could tell you just briefly about how we went through the process of deciding to advocate for a commission, and then maybe Margaret, who served on the commission, can talk about what that looks like now. So the mission and purpose, when Tosa came together, and we talked about, we thought about our name, we decided that we wanted to think of ourselves as a group that was inspired to help Wauwatosa become more welcoming. And that's kind of the mantra that we've always said, is that what our guiding star is, that we want everyone to be welcoming. Issues around race have been so endemically historically important to Wauwatosa that that's where we started. Because of exclusionary laws about people not being allowed to live or buy, maybe to come and work, but you had to leave by the time it got dark. We felt that that was the heart of what first needed to be our focus. So that's where our work has been for the last few years. We did a lot of sort of mumbling and bumbling around after we, started on our cultural work to try to understand what were racial justice issues in Wauwatosa. And out of that came an understanding, as we talked to city leaders in particular, that there were a couple of ways that that people who are residents or even outside, people who are in Wauwatosa, could influence what was happening in Wauwatosa, besides running, for one of the few slots in an alder, would be to work on the strategic plan and set some goals and North Stars for Wauwatosa to strategically become more welcoming, more racially just, more equitable. And secondly, that we looked at the city structure and found that some of the work was done through these commissions. And there were a number of commissions. And so as we listened and thought, we became better understanding that these were important ways that people could get involved in Wauwatosa and be participants in what our city would be and how our city was run. At the same time, we did about a year or 6 to 8 months, we did research on what other cities were doing around the country. We looked for peer cities, suburbs, near side suburbs, or edge cities, as we might call them, in racially divided zones, communities. We looked at Decatur, which is right outside Atlanta. We looked at Edina, which is right outside Minneapolis. We looked at Asheville, North Carolina, which isn't right outside and anything particular, but had an incredible journey in terms of going from a very white racist community to having an equity officer, Office of Diversity, and so. And we kept thinking, what's the right model? And as we understood and spoke with all the alders, it became really clear that creating a commission was something that might be possible, and that it was the way some of the work would be done in Wauwatosa. And that's when we started to really throw our energy. It took our Tosa Together about 2 years to work with the alders, to understand all of this, and to really push for that. And then with the support of a broad coalition of people in Wauwatosa and the alders, the ordinance was written and the ordinance was passed, and I will say unanimously. And that's something I'm very proud, is to say that I live in a city that created this commission and that it passed unanimously.
Mayor McBride, how many of the constituents that you serve would have held the same spirit of this unanimous decision to pass the commission? Are people in general excited about the idea of inclusion and equity for Tosa?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to and, you know, what street you're on.
Okay.
As I said earlier, there are remnants of old Wauwatosa. I'm one of those remnants. I'm an old Wauwatosa guy, both in age and length of service as a Wauwatosan. The politics of Wauwatosa have changed dramatically over the last 20 years. When I was growing up, it was probably about 95% Republican. My parents were among the only Democrats in the whole town. In fact, my mother was the co-founder of what was called the Democratic Unit of Wauwatosa back in 1954, and she was one of the loneliest people in town. In the last 20 years, we've gone from, I think, never having voted for a Democrat for president to voting for Barack Obama twice and Hillary Clinton. And in the last election, Joe Karofsky for Supreme Court got 66% of the vote. That's a sea change. So Wauwatosa has become much more blue, but there's still big patches of red and big patches of purple in there. And so some people think the Equity and Inclusion Commission is the worst idea of all time, but I would say many more people think that whatever it's achieved or not achieved, it's an effort worth having. So I think the community spirit is generally supportive. It depends issue to issue, I'm sure, but this is a very different community than the one I grew up in.
Margaret, you were going to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, yeah, no problem. That was a good frame. There's two really big distinctions between the commission and Tosa Together is a citizens group and does a lot of different things. It does education kind of events. We're present on Facebook, but the purpose of Tosa Together is for citizens who are united around the values of welcome, diversity, justice, and really taking responsibility. We advocate for the things that we want to have, and we take action as citizens do. And that's great, and that has its own role, but it's an outside role compared to the commission. I also serve on the senior commission that looks at how the city of Wauwatosa can best serve our senior citizens. So I had a lot of experience on the senior commission when we're talking about setting up what the Equity and Inclusion Commission would be. The Equity and Inclusion Commission is a group of citizens, but it is formed by ordinance and is, not an ad hoc, doesn't come and go with the mayor. We are appointed, we have terms, and our one job is to officially recommend things that we think will advance equity and inclusion in our city to the Common Council. And so we have our special focus on helping the city evolve. And there's a lot that the people in the city want to do. There's a lot of things are coming to fruition around training of city employees, around training of elected officials, around understanding and the hiring practices, but understanding how people who work for the city can give excellent customer service to everyone. And where it's really, really come to a head and been taking a lot of our attention is the police department as a department of the city of Wauwatosa. And that is where we have seen a lot of our desire for the Equity and Inclusion Commission to be a place where citizens can be heard. There's citizens, people, and not just, I shouldn't just say citizens of Wauwatosa, but interested people who live, work, play, walk through, enjoy, reside next to, or whatever, can come in and say, this is what we think Wauwatosa needs to do to be a more equitable and inclusive and welcoming place. And so we've been able to serve as a place where people have come and said what they wanted to say. We create our agenda with that input, and so it's really like a steady, open forum. Well, no, I shouldn't say open forum, but a steady forum for that kind of conversation to happen. And that is so different. Where we were in 2016, I was a citizen and I was literally sitting in my house trying to figure out, who do I talk to in Wauwatosa city government about what I think the police should do after the shooting death of Jay Anderson. And I could not come up with anything that felt at all satisfying. Send an email here, maybe talk to somebody there, but I always felt alone. It's like there's not this, how do I as a citizen talk about this? And I can't just say do this one thing. It really is, I didn't have the answer, but I wanted to know that people were involved in that. And now I feel like if the Equity and Inclusion Commission had existed then, I was like, okay, they have an agenda that's of interest to me, and I can say what I need to say. I'll be heard, and so it just is very different. It's like the city of Wauwatosa grew a big ear about this issue.
This has been a very quick, it probably doesn't feel quick for you all doing the work and the drudge to get it done, but in the scope of things, it's been an evolution. I can think back to Margaret and Lynn, the meeting that I spoke at with my colleague Julie Granger. Sean referenced,
and to acknowledge that was amazing. Yes.
Yeah, Sean referenced MMAC's Region of Choice initiative, which now over 100 companies and organizations have signed on and sort of taken this pledge to say that they were going to increase the number of Hispanic, Latino, and Black managers. So basically in the leadership positions, and then employment as a whole. And Wauwatosa is the first city or government entity to sign on to be a part of the pledge, which Sean referenced. I'm going to talk to you, Sean. I'm going to come to you right now, talk a little bit more about the work and what you all have accomplished in the commission and what you're looking forward to. But I just want to encourage folks to go into the chat. We're coming up on we have about 15 minutes left. And my colleague, Marjorie, is going to be going through the chat and the Q&A to pull out the questions and address the panel. If you have questions or you have questions brewing, now would be the time for you to start thinking about those. So Sean, you got the Region of Choice Pledge signed. So you basically brought that before everyone. Was that voted on for Wauwatosa to sign on to that?
Yeah, so we make recommendations as a commission, and those recommendations then go to committees and then go to the Common Council for a full vote.
So this is the page on the MMAC site, and the list of over 100 companies now that have signed this pledge, and Wauwatosa is in the mix. Very proud to, so all the departments in Wauwatosa basically will be affected by this and the overall goals therein. Sean, you also mentioned the ban prohibiting chokeholds and restraints. Talk to us a little bit about that, why this was important, and what you all did to get this through.
There's my quote. Indeed it was. You know, again, for me to just be a citizen of Wauwatosa like anybody else, to be given this position, I take my roles very seriously. And I take my role in doing civil rights and racial justice, period, very seriously. And I think that, what does that say about our commission? That, you know, unanimously as a commission, we moved that recommendation forward. Again, I work with phenomenal people on the commission. I'm very thankful for that. And it was very important for me, for us to start in a place of understanding of where some barriers are in our community and some things that need to be changed and can be changed. And I think some people come away with, on the other side, that disagree. It was like, well, that George Floyd incident was in Minneapolis, or that Eric Garner incident was in New York. What does that have to do with Milwaukee? What does that have to do with Wauwatosa? So why are you guys even discussing this here? Why are we even talking about this? We have good police officers. Well, laws are put in place for preventive measures. At least we try to, right? Every law is put in place most of the time as a preventive measure to prevent something from happening. We try to do that instead of reactionary laws. So I think for me in this instance, even though things happen in other cities that led up to this, to me, it's a reactionary measure that I must take based upon actions in other cities to create a preventive measure for something happening here in our city. So I want Wauwatosa to be the lead suburb and one of the best suburbs in the entire country for leading on equity and inclusion. I want people from all over to be like, did you see what's going on in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin? Wauwatosa, Wisconsin has just put an ordinance in place on chokeholds. Wauwatosa, Wisconsin has made a commitment in writing, you know, that they are going to work hard to increase their diversity and inclusion amongst their staff. Other suburbs need to take note. Other suburbs really need to watch what we're doing in Wauwatosa in the midst of all this. And as Mayor McBride alluded to, people on both sides of the aisle, from a Democratic standpoint, from a Republican standpoint, this is their Equity and Inclusion Commission. This is the Equity and Inclusion Commission of all residents in Wauwatosa. We're making sure that we want everyone to be safe and happy with their families and live in a diverse world, and nothing can get done unless we have these conversations and we come together and talk peacefully and understand the frustrations on both sides. And I bet you that you're always going to find there's going to be more in common than not with different people. It's just—
Mayor McBride, go ahead and jump in there.
Yeah, I wanted to say, not to disagree with Sean at all. It's important to run these things through the Equity and Inclusion Commission because they're citizen voices. But I will say that we were prepared as mayor and city staff to refer the same issues directly to the Common Council, and I think we would have had a similar result, but it's important to have a citizen commission to say, this is what we want. And I agree with 100% with Sean on my commitment, and I know the city administrator and the city staff, we want Wauwatosa to be the model community when it comes to race relations. We're far from that right now, especially at this really difficult time. But maybe out of this crisis, we can achieve something even better. But we are in a unique situation here. We're right in the heart of the metropolitan area. We are cheek to jowl with Milwaukee, but we're also cheek to jowl with Waukesha County. We've been called the bridge between the two communities, and I think we can act as the bridge. And one thing I just want to add, Wauwatosa is about 12 or 13% minority. Nationwide, and by the way, that's actually pretty good for a Milwaukee suburb, which is pathetic. But nationwide, the last statistic I saw, and it's very old, is that the suburbs tend to be 39% minority. In Milwaukee, the Milwaukee area, we think it's great if it's 12%. It's not great. We're not living up to the American standard of diversity. We need to, Milwaukee is so segregated, we need to expand opportunity for people to go into the suburbs and vice versa. So we're a long way from achieving this model community status, but you know, with equity and inclusion, Tosa Together, and the city government and others working together on this, we have a job to do, but I think we're all intent on doing it.
Mayor McBride, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to some of the more recent news and headlines that are out about what's going on in Wauwatosa. I received a couple of phone calls and emails with people wondering if we were going to ask questions about Officer Mensah, and I didn't have any direct questions or specific questions that I wanted to pose to you, but with everything that's happening in our world today, in the environment that you're in, and in the scope of everything we're talking about, what is it that you want to say or that you want folks to know about any reforms or conversations that you're having about the way folks are policed in Wauwatosa and the way that you're organizing or hoping to change things? Anything you want to share for folks who are listening?
After George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, the next meeting I had with the department heads, which was our weekly agenda meeting, I said, we need to respond to this. It's a crisis, it's an opportunity, because we focused people's attention on the inequities. And as a community, as a city government, we need to talk about those things that we're doing right, those things that we kind of sort of thought about doing, but we haven't done. And then we need to look at the things that we haven't even thought about that we should be doing. And I immediately gave everyone the task of coming up with that. Well, events kept overtaking us, and it's been hard to keep focus on anything other than day-to-day events. But the Common Council created the ad hoc committee to try to steer some of these reforms through the Common Council. And we have a long list of things that we can do. And the unfortunate part is we're focusing so much on policing that we can't focus on some of the other things we need to work on, which is how do we make housing more affordable for people? How do we undo a legacy of redlining and other things that no longer exist as a legal thing, but still have an impact on housing opportunity for people? How do we make sure that people feel welcome in Wauwatosa? These are things that go beyond policing. And you know, I can only start it in my 4-year term as mayor, but it's something that we need to start and we need to talk about constantly. And the unfortunate part, the very necessary thing that we're talking about with policing does unfortunately also detract from our ability to talk about all those other inequities that we need to address as a community. So I just want to say, really, we're trying to work on all of it. You know, it's just a lot.
Go ahead, Margaret.
I think Lynn and I both put our hands up because what I want to say about that is that it's not a linear process. It's everything all at once. And I'm encouraged by the responsiveness of the city staff to this, especially the efforts to do the training. and to really ramp up. There was some training that really started with the school board, but to expand the training throughout the city, throughout city government. And I think the Equity and Inclusion Commission is showing just how much work there is to do, and you know, to what kind of investment we're really going to have in order to have the results that we want to have. And we're still in that discovery period of how big this is that we're lifting. And so I don't really think it's an either or. I think it's actually, there's energy now in the system. And that's one way that we can look at it. But I appreciate with your role as somebody who's trying to plan and get things done, that it really is, it's a disruption. But I you know, as we know, social change doesn't happen once ABC. Social change happens in sort of all
I'm not worried
kinds.
about disruptions. I'm just saying that we have a lot more to deal with than just the police. The police are a very necessary part of this. But we have a whole raft of inequities over time in America and in Wauwatosa that need to be addressed. And I just want to highlight that we have other things that we want to work on as well.
All right, Lynn, what did you want to say?
And I would echo, I mean, Tosa Together has had meetings on housing. We have a housing initiative. We have some other things that we're working on. But I just wanted to step into my personal role for a moment, because it is my neighborhood that the event last Saturday night happened in. And it was a very dramatic, stunning, and we're still kind of, I would say I still feel really, really fragile around it. But the point I would make is, I think that, again, what is a potential here with what just happened on Saturday night is that we have a structure as a city if we choose to use it. And we have a structure that is bringing out more people's voices. And I think the tension that exists right now, at least from my perspective, looking back on last weekend, is that not all the narratives and not all the accounts of what happened are actually being given equal and or equitable playtime. And that's something that Tosa Together is working on trying to change. So, you know, we would like to see that when we get in situations like this, that we actually use some of the structures that we have, like the Equity and Inclusion Commission, the ability for people and neighbors to make reports and be heard. And so that would be my challenge. This is still a very young project. I mean, Wauwatosa's been around for a long time, and Wauwatosa's had a different way of doing things for a long time. And we don't want to throw out what Wauwatosa was. We want to take the best of what Wauwatosa was, the beautiful parks that people talked about, the wonderful schools, the community, the small neighborhoods, a sense of really knowing who your neighbor is, all those opportunities, but we want to take them and bring them into the 21st century. And really make it a place that welcomes all people. And that's going to happen when we realize that when we have all people here, we might not all see things the same way or think about things in the same way. And we need to take the time to stop, to listen, and to really trust and hear each other in genuine ways. That would be my hope. And that's my hope for the long term. It's also my hope for the next few days. And we'll be coming out, Tosa Together, we'll be making a statement about what happened in my neighborhood last weekend.
Lynn, if you want to give a little quick background on what happened quickly, and then I'll go straight to you, Marjorie Yoshida, to give a couple of.
Yeah, I don't want to take a lot of time. I mean, I think people have read a lot about it in the newspaper, but there have been protests, peaceful protest marches through our community. There is a police officer that the Fire and Police Commission is reviewing. At this point, thanks to the work of our city leaders to really think about that and realize that that's something that needed to happen. And that officer has been residing in our neighborhood. And I don't want to get into a struggle over what happened, but my feeling and what I've heard is that there are a couple of very clearly different narratives. And what will move this situation forward is not just the police investigation, it is taking the time to hear these different narratives and really understand what they're trying to say, and perhaps recognizing that there might be truths in all the pieces that are there, and that things need to be responded to with that broader understanding, not just with a really singular piece. I think that people can look up the details. You can see the different press releases that have been out there and you can compare them for yourself. I would encourage and I would challenge Wauwatosa to be the very best it can be in the next week, and then further on, to take this situation as an opportunity, rather to pull us down, but rather to push us up and to make us, as Mayor McBride said so well, on that path to being much more inclusive and responsive than maybe we were 20 years ago.
I may just jump in and say this too. Just our nation right now, as a whole, needs healing. Our nation right now is divided. So Wauwatosa, being a suburb of the United States of America, is no different. However, what we can do is demonstrate our leadership collectively. And I don't mean that by the leadership on this phone call. I mean leadership amongst all residents of Wauwatosa, all residents of Milwaukee, and whoever else is on this call watching and listening as well. I'm talking to you too. Leadership in general and being on the right side of history. And that doesn't mean necessarily anything politically, because racism and violence should never be partisan issues. Racism should never be a partisan issue in our country. Therefore, we need to collectively heal. And we need to collectively understand that together we can have a more stronger neighborhoods, more stronger cities, and a more stronger nation than ever before. And that takes a lot of coming together and having the conversations that we need to have, and to truly understanding both sides and what each side wants. We're not even having some of those conversations anymore with people. There's just a lot of, finger pointing, and that's never going to get the needle moving forward. It doesn't happen in Congress when they have to sit down and vote on laws, and it's not going to happen anywhere else. So we truly have to start understanding one another, having those deep conversations, and getting things done that benefit both of our lives.
Absolutely, Sean. I totally agree. This whole series, everything we're doing is about the power of conversations. And when people actively listen to each other and open their hearts, that we're able to bridge a lot of divides. We're not always going to agree, but I appreciate the grace that you all are handling the tension of progress. We're a little bit over our time, so I understand if any of the panelists have to jump off. I'm going to take one question. Marjorie, do you see a question in the chat that you want to put forth to the panel?
Yes, this is a great question. I was thinking this myself. Are there any ideas, programs being discussed that would actually impact the hearts and minds of Wauwatosa residents that are not seeking justice for all, i.e. disinterested white folks that have spent their lives in Tosa being conditioned to believe in white supremacy? It goes on, but I'll go with that. And Margaret indicated she wanted to say something.
That's open to anyone who wants to respond.
I was going to throw that to Dennis because of the conversations with the Zeidler Center.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to come up with some answer for that. Yeah, we are, one of the things we've talked about from the beginning, ever since George Floyd was murdered, was to have community dialogues. And we are working with the Zeidler Center to try to bring together community dialogues. The Zeidler Center, if you're not familiar with it, folks, I'm sure most of you are, but they've done things at my church, for example, and they are hard conversations, but they are mediated by talented people who are trained to bring people together in diverse viewpoints. So it's a start. There are some people whose minds will never be opened, and other people whose minds are open just enough so that we might be able to work our way through the crack. It's difficult. I will tell you that since Saturday night's incident, I have received a deluge of emails from people on all points of the political spectrum, and trying to find common ground in there is difficult. What I'm asking people to do is remember that we do have different versions out there, and we need to keep an open mind to find out what the facts are. I keep getting different things sent to me, and I try to incorporate that. What we do know is this: the indisputable fact is that something happened on Saturday night at a house that the officer was in, and one or more gunshots occurred, and there was some sort of scuffle. Who's responsible for that? I don't know. I hope an investigation can determine that. But we have to get away from violence as a solution. You know, I heard more talk about how great John Lewis was, and he was. He and Martin Luther King and the others preached the gospel of nonviolence, and I don't know where we get with violence. We just have to. We are not going to get together with people of closed minds on either end of the spectrum. If we have violence, we can only do it with some sort of peaceful intent. We have to bring people together. So the Zeidler Center, I hope, can do that for us.
Can I also add that Tosa Together received a grant last year, an international grant actually, to have dialogue, and we had them all planned for April, and of course we had to close them down. But we will be, because of the COVID-19, we have been retooling. We are now doing, as of this, earlier this week, we're doing 3 weeks out of the month, we're doing these online Tosa talks, chats. And then we will be taking the grant and following up and having, if people are interested in participating in small group discussion around how to change Wauwatosa and address racial justice issues, we'll be having those during the fall. I have been in communication also with the city of Wauwatosa because they have some plans, and I hope that they become unified plans rather than competing or parallel plans. We will be hosting with some trained facilitators online discussions around this as well. So you can find out more about that by keeping track of Tosa Together. And that's our advertisement for our new Facebook series, which you can watch even if you don't participate in Facebook. We had a very successful one on Tuesday night where 4 high schoolers who had graduated from Tosa West, and they were all either biracial or African American, talked about their experiences there and what they would like to see change in the Tosa schools. And of course we have one coming up next week and then the one the week after, and it will continue on always on weeks 2, 3, and 4 of the month. Always talking either to a government official, a community person telling their stories, or talking about a social issue. So those folks who are listening out there, if you'd like to be a participant, just shoot an email to tosatogether@gmail.com and we'll get that to the folks who are organizing and leading the Tosa Together Tosa Talks.
Absolutely, ways to get involved. I want to thank the panel. Mayor McBride, I know you had a conflict and you made time to be here with us for this conversation. I really appreciate that. Sean Lowe, as always, thank you so much for being a part of this. Dr. Worley, this is the 3rd time I've tapped you and you never tell me no, so you're spoiling me now. I'm gonna keep messing with you. You're so good. And Margaret, Arnie, thank you so much for letting me and MMAC know about what you all were doing in Tulsa. You brought it to our attention. Even some of our staff that were our residents in Tulsa weren't fully aware of everything that's going on, and now they're like all in and plugged in and really committed. So thank you all so much for everything that you're doing. I'm so proud of you and everything that you're doing. So at this point, any panelist that needs to jump off, this is your time to do that. I totally understand. I want any fuelers or participants who are still in the space to go into the chat right now. If you have any ideas for other conversations that you'd like to see us have, any comments for me, please go ahead and share those. But right now, I'd like you to send little love notes to our panel, tell them how much you appreciate them telling their story, taking the time to be with us today. Those that can stay with us, the panelists that can stay with us, will go in the chat and see your little love notes, and now is the time for you to share those. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna play one of my new favorite songs.
Corey, can we send a love note back to you for inviting us? I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Corey.
It's a very inspirational story.
Thank you so much.
It's a great story. There's so many corporations and companies, and I'm listening to conversations all the time where people are really kind of wrestling with how to tackle this and how to organize their folks. And I wanted you all to tell this story because I'm like, if you guys could do this with some of the challenges you had and the successes that you've already shown, I'm really inspired. And I feel like other people will be too, by everything that you all have accomplished. So I will accept that love note and encourage the fuelers to go in there and give you guys your love notes. This is one of my new favorite songs, Milwaukee Strong. This is put together by 40 local Milwaukee region artists. And I
true. We work together, we're heroes through and through.
Like the foundation of our homes, we stand together, Milwaukee strong.
Through the fire, through the rain, our tomorrow will be a better day. 'Cause we are proud of what we know. We are the good land, Milwaukee strong. From the ashes and the dust, we will rise, we'll all stand up.
With hope in our eyes, we'll grow on. We will rebuild brick by brick, stone by stone.
Through the fire, through the rain, our tomorrow will be a better day. 'Cause we are proud of what we know. We are the good land, Milwaukee strong.
Milwaukee strong like black coffee, yeah. Milwaukee black and brown, so please change policy, yeah. Milwaukee less work or ended poverty, Milwaukee growing, let's make sure that we grow it properly, yeah. Milwaukee home, so let our love show, Milwaukee special, invest in the homegrown talent. We all searching for balance, united the good lands, approaching all of our challenges.
Hand in hand, you and me,
Working together like a family. Together we stand, do it all.
hand in hand, standing tall. Every day, in every way, spreading love, and walk away. Loud and proud, through and through. This is who we are. This is what we do. Through the rain, our tomorrow will be a better day.
That was great. I really like that was great.
Milwaukee strong.
Thank you, Corjo.
Thank you. Thank you,
great.
guys. This is great. I see the love notes. Thanks, fuelers. Get back to work.
Okay.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys Thursday.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.